Doom broke video games in 1993 because it was a game that had graphics and action beyond anything else in the world on a platform known for being terrible at both of those things. In the 80s, PC games sucked. Some computers, particularly those by Commodore, were able to keep up with the graphical and action-heavy games of Nintendo and Sega's home consoles. Some Commodore computers even cost less than $1,000 doing it. But unless you were buying a specialized graphics workstation or a glorified game console with a keyboard, personal computers, specifically the platform we used to call IBM clones, were a pretty paltry place for gaming. Flight sims were definitely the best thing on the platform, but they were boring and obscure. They lacked the mass appeal of games like Super Mario and The Legend of Zelda. Aside from flight sims, only the crunchiest of RPG and adventure gamers would really be satisfied playing on PC. Anybody who liked scrolling action games, the kind of thing that was the NES's bread and butter, was pretty much out of luck on the platform. Also, all the games looked like shit, because during the 80s, the standards were, at worst, 8 horrible shades of purple, or at best, 16 shades of neon garbage, none of which lent themselves to good gaming. In the 90s, that started to change. 256 color graphics were letting PC games actually look good for once. And processors were getting fast enough that PCs could compensate for their lack of dedicated scrolling, sprites, and other game-focused hardware features by simply faking those things in software, or even by doing things in software that other platforms couldn't do with their dedicated chipsets. The floodgates on PC games were finally broken in 1993, when Doom made PCs a legitimate contender against your SNES or Genesis, or even a $1,000 Amiga gaming computer. The first-person shooter is a kind of game that didn't exist before Doom. With the brief exception of Wolfenstein 3D, a game also made by id, the studio who made Doom, and with just barely enough of the genre hallmarks to really qualify in a modern sense. There were simply not first-person action games focused on gunplay mechanics before 1993. Before Doom, the only first-person games were dungeon crawlers, which used grid-based levels and turn-based RPG combat, sometimes even literally simulating the combat system of tabletop RPGs like D&D. Those earliest first-person dungeon crawling games were clunky. They relied on grid-based levels and movement to make first-person combat work within the limitations of hardware and control available at the time. Doom's major innovations on these first-person games were as follows. First, ditching grid-based environments and having rooms that could be any shape, throwing verticality into the mix for good measure. Second, replacing the melee weapons and spells of first-person RPGs with a focus on gunplay. It's really difficult to judge distance in a first-person game, and melee attacks often feel disconnected when a player can't see or experience the body of the character you're controlling. By switching from largely melee combat to a style of gameplay almost entirely based around an arsenal of varied guns, Doom created a nearly seamless first-person experience that behaved intuitively and allowed for fast-paced action. Third, Doom also ditched the narrow corridors and cramped rooms of your typical dungeon environment, with wide hallways and open rooms, complicated spaces that a player could move freely in to avoid any attacks taking their place. This focus on avoiding damage lent itself to the game's action-focused gameplay, leading to almost dance-like gameplay loops of avoiding and returning fire with enemies. Those innovations created a whole new genre of 3D action game that we now call first-person shooters, and everyone took notice. Game console manufacturers tripped over themselves, trying to get id to license Doom to their consoles and get the port first. And on the software side, PC game devs immediately poured out a flood of Doom clones to try and ride id's coattails. Amid this flood of Doom-like games, what was Sony up to? Well, nothing in 1993. Why would they be? They didn't have a stake in video games at the time. But when Sony did get into gaming, they knew that their shiny new console would be a lot more enticing, especially to Americans deep in a first-person shooter obsession, if it could do something like Doom on hardware that cost a fraction of what a capable PC did at the time. Kileak The DNA Imperative, called Kileak the Blood in Japan and Europe, is that Doom-like experience that PlayStation wanted for their console. Though the PlayStation wasn't necessarily dependent on Kileak, after all, a port of Doom was coming soon, and console gamers like plenty of things that aren't shooters, or at least they did in 1995, it would have helped a lot. Sony wanted another notch in their belt that, like Toshinden, could pull away gamers from other ways of playing games. In this case, PCs instead of arcades. Instead of telling you directly how I feel about Kileak, let's just go through the first few minutes of the game. Kileak opens with a full motion video cutscene before we even hit the title screen. Though the letters FMV are best known today for a pretty dreadful genre of games which consist of barely interactive movie clips, things like Night Trap or Five Nights at Freddy's. Back in the 90s, decoding digital video at a full 30 frames per second was a legitimately impressive hardware feature. And even in games that we don't call FMV games, it was used extensively. Every pre-rendered cutscene you've ever seen in a game is an FMV, as are many of the animated backgrounds in games like Chrono Cross and Final Fantasy VII. Sadly, instead of offering intrigue or excitement when you turn the game on, Kileak's FMV offers confusion, overwhelmedness. It's a whole lot of plot in a game that I've never played and don't care about before I even get to select my save file. Once you do get into gameplay, you're just sort of dropped in a single, small, empty room. You take a few steps forward, and under a second after getting control of the game, you're halted in your tracks, pulled to a strange menu screen you've never seen before, and you hear your suit's computer tell you that your mech is working. Mostly. Here, take a look at it right now. You take a step forward, the game freezes, and pulls up this screen, which I've never seen before in my life, as the computer rattles off info saying that this part of your mech is working and one other part isn't. And then it just sort of goes away, eventually. After that, you can look around the room. At this point, you'll probably press every button to figure out what's going on. It won't help you very much unless you press square up against this thing, in which case you'll see a miserably slow FMV cutscene. I don't even get why this is in here, honestly. It's not like mecha fetishism. The robot's not doing anything cool, it's turning knobs to unlock a door. Speaking of, door's unlocked. Let's get into the game, you think. You think. Instead, you get frozen and pulled into another lengthy FMV cutscene that tells you nothing. You know what this guy says? This guy says, and I quote, the enemy are everywhere and they'll attack you. In a video game, yeah, they're enemies, they're gonna attack me. Speaking of those enemies, they're coming up. We've got little drone guys who just sort of meander towards you. Fine first enemies in a game, but look at where you're fighting them. You're in a tunnel, basically. You're doing nothing. You barely have any options on how to fight these guys. Here, up next, is the first real enemy that threatens you in the game. And he's awful. Look, you take damage, but you're walking down a hallway. You couldn't avoid that damage if you tried. So instead, every enemy encounter doesn't give you a dramatic chance to dodge and fight your way through a horde of monsters. Instead, it boils down to you walking through the fog, being jump scared by something that shoots at you, firing back until that thing dies, and then walking away with a little less health than before. Essentially, when Sony asked themselves where to go from Doom, they are, I think, the only people who chose to go backwards. To go back to a dungeon crawling style gameplay loop of simple, menial combat that acts only as an interruption and resource drain on exploration. I'd imagine that with the cutscenes, small amount of enemies, and dark, foggy areas, Kileak is going for something of an ambient horror vibe, but the game's graphics, gameplay, and story don't support that. It just feels disjointed and mostly boring to play. The gameplay loop is nothing, really, and it is a massive detriment to a game that could have been alright at least, if it had taken more lessons from the shooters it was trying to ride the coattails of. In my teaser from last episode, I mentioned that this game was made by Sony Music, not Sony Computer Entertainment, the game division. There's not really much more to say about that, other than the fact that it's a bit weird. The game does have pretty good music, at least. To this point, my review has only been from my perspective as a gaming obsessive who's lived my entire life in the 21st century. Never known a world without Halo, let alone without first-person shooters in general. Because of that, I think it's easy for me to only see the places this game fails, and it's difficult for me to put myself in the shoes of a gamer or game reviewer actually in 1995, when first-person shooters were brand new and there were barely any of them. In that world, though there were certainly better shooters, games like Marathon, Doom 2, that are clearly leagues above Kileak in terms of quality, there were only a few of them. To someone in 1995, was Kileak really all that bad? To Gameinformer, at least, no. They gave it a 7.8 out of 10, an incredibly respectable score that this game, being as slow and barren as it is, would never receive today. But on the merit of its genre and a polygonal 3D world alone, Kileak was impressive for the time. Most of the shooters that followed Doom were on PC, and most of them used Doom's binary space partitioning level format, a very limited way to build a 3D world. As well, most used 2D sprites for characters and items in the game. All those things combined to make games that, while 3D, were much less impressive in their 3D graphics than something like Kileak. On top of that, the FMV cutscenes, which I find annoying and intrusive, would have been a treat to gamers in 1995. Toy Story, the first 3D animated movie, wouldn't come out until November, 2 months after this game. Having this much high-quality 3D animation in a game must have been mind-blowing for the time. But without all that luster, without the novelty of genre, the glow of next-gen graphics, or the glimpse into the future that pre-rendered cutscenes afforded, Kileak is just a disappointing dungeon crawler, dressed up a bit with the accoutrement of a first-person shooter. time comes for us all. Even if you don't change, the world around you will. And that's something you have to be prepared for. Next up, the Raiden project may be a game from 1990, but it feels just like 1942.